Ayubowan. We are starting another seminar under the series of seminars organized by the Bank of Ceylon under the NanaJaya program. Today we are focusing on the 7th unit of the syllabus, money banking and the price level. Actually, in a previous discussion also, we discussed about the money banking and the price level, but during that discussion we did not focus on the banking section, the credit creation process of the commercial banks. So this discussion is specially focused on the commercial banking section of the 7th unit, and with a set of questions we are trying to discuss the operations of a single bank within the banking system, and then afterwards we are focusing on the operations of the overall banking system along with the credit creation process. So we will start the discussion, and during this section at the initial discussion we are doing some structured questions with the operations of the commercial banking system, and afterwards we will focus on some multiple choice questions. Right, we will read the question. Given below is the balance sheet of a commercial bank operates within the banking system. So in this kind of a question, a very important thing that you need to focus is you should see whether the question is talking about a single bank or whether it is talking about the whole banking system, so that you can identify by reading the question. Given below is the balance sheet of a commercial bank operates within the banking system. Right, a commercial bank operates within the banking system. So with that you need to understand this question is talking about a single bank, the operations of a single bank within the banking system. Why is it necessary to clearly differentiate the operations of one bank and the operations of the banking system? The credit creation process applies to the whole banking system of the economy. The credit creation process, the deposit expansion multiplier, these things are applied to the whole banking system. When the question is talking about a single bank, when the question is focused on the operations of a single bank, the credit creation process does not apply there in one hand, and therefore there is no deposit expansion multiplier, no application of multiplier when the question is talking about a single bank. So here given below is the balance sheet of a commercial bank operates within the banking system. So this question is talking about a single bank. Liabilities, deposits rupees 8,000 million, assets, reserves 3,000 million, and loans 5,000 million. So based on that we are supposed to answer these two parts. Part A, if this bank holds an excess reserve of 1,000 million rupees, calculate the statutory reserve ratio. So if we go back to the balance sheet again, the existing deposits is how much? 8,000 million. The existing amount of cash reserves is how much? 3,000 million. And in part A of the question it says that they are having an excess reserve of 1,000 million rupees. Calculate the statutory reserve ratio. Right. The cash reserve of a commercial bank, comprises of two components. Right. The statutory reserve, that is the minimum required amount of reserves to be kept by a commercial bank, and then the excess reserve. that is the amount of cash reserve exceeding the minimum required amount of cash reserves. Based on the question, you can see that they are having a deposit figure of rupees 8,000 million and a cash reserve of 3,000. The existing amount of cash reserves of this bank is how much? 3,000 million. At the same time, the question says that they are having an excess reserve of 1,000 million. What does this mean? The amount of statutory reserve of this bank is 2,000. The statutory reserve held by this bank is how much? 2,000. Why is it? According to the given balance sheet, this bank has a cash reserve of 3,000. In part A, they said that the excess reserve held by the bank is 1,000. So, therefore, the statutory reserve should be 2,000. What does this mean? The minimum amount of cash reserve this bank should maintain for a deposit of 8,000 is 2,000 million rupees. So, the statutory reserve ratio can be calculated by, I will use SRR to identify the statutory reserve ratio. The statutory reserve divided by the total deposit they hold at the moment multiplied by 100. So, the statutory reserve we already calculated, it is 2,000 million. The existing amount of deposit of this bank is 8,000 multiplied by 100. The statutory reserve ratio of this economy is 25%. The statutory reserve ratio faced by this banking system is how much? 25%, because the minimum amount of reserve this bank should maintain for a total deposit of 8,000 is 2,000. So, statutory reserve is expressed as a fraction of the total deposit of the bank multiplied by 100, you will get the statutory reserve ratio of the bank, right. So, we answered the part A of the question. If the bank holds an excess reserve of 1,000 million, calculate the statutory reserve ratio. So, we already calculated the statutory reserve ratio. Part B, if this bank receives a new deposit of 2,000 million rupees, what is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer? Now, they are receiving a new deposit of 2,000. At any given point of time, whatever the amount of excess reserve a commercial bank holds only can be offered as loans, right. The statutory reserve shows the minimum amount of cash reserve a commercial bank should maintain from the total deposits they collected from the general public. So, therefore, the cash reserve of a commercial bank should be at least equal to the statutory reserve. If any cash reserve is there with a commercial bank exceeding this minimum required amount of cash reserve, that is, in other words, the statutory reserve, that amount of cash reserve which is in excess to the statutory reserve is what we identify as the excess reserve of a commercial bank. So, this excess reserve only can be offered as loans by a commercial bank. So, in part B, they are asking us to identify the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer after receiving a new deposit of 2,000 million rupees. So, first of all, we should calculate the excess cash reserve the commercial bank is having after receiving this new deposit. Previously, they had a deposit of 8,000. New deposit total. Previously, they had a deposit of 8,000 and they got a new cash deposit of 2,000. So, the total deposit will go up to 10,000. And new cash reserve, they already had a cash reserve of how much? 3,000. And along with the receipt of new deposit of 2,000, that will be creating a new cash reserve of 2,000 as well. Receiving a new deposit of 2,000 means what? In one hand, that 2,000 will be added to the deposits. On the other hand, that 2,000 will be added to the reserves. So, as a result, the cash reserves of the commercial bank will go up to how much? 5,000. Right? The new deposits is 10,000, new cash reserve is 5,000. So, with that we can calculate the new statutory reserve. How do we get the new statutory reserve? The new amount of deposits is 10,000. This should be multiplied by the statutory reserve ratio. We already calculated the statutory reserve ratio as 25%. So, the new amount of statutory reserve is 2,500, but we already found out that they are having a cash reserve of 5,000. So, with this we can calculate the new excess reserve. How? From the cash reserve we need to deduct the statutory reserve. Cash reserve held by the bank is 5,000. Statutory reserve that should be maintained by the bank is 2,500. Therefore, excess reserve is 2,500. So, what do they ask from us? In part B, if this bank receives a new deposit of 2,000 million rupees, what is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer? So, I told you, whatever the amount of excess reserves this bank has at a given point of time only can be offered as loans. Now, we calculated that this bank is having an excess reserve of 2,500 million at the moment. This bank is having an excess reserve of 2,500 million at the moment. So, this excess reserve of 2,500 only they can offer as loans. Therefore, the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer is 2,500 million rupees. 2,500 million rupees. So, this is how we answer the part B of the question. The question is, if this bank receives a new deposit of 2,000 million rupees, what is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer? So, in answering this question, should identify the new amount of bank deposits, and then you should identify the new amount of cash reserves. With that, you should calculate the new excess reserve. So, that excess reserve this bank is having is what they can offer as loans. So, therefore, see the way we calculated it, right? We calculated the excess reserve, and afterwards we should state that the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer is 2,500 million rupees, right? So, we will move on to the next question. Question number 2. A commercial bank is having an excess reserve of 500 million rupees. So, again this question is also focusing on one commercial bank within the banking system. So, whenever a question is talking about one commercial bank, we need to be aware that the credit creation does not apply there. no application of deposit expansion multiplier when we are dealing with a single bank. The deposit expansion multiplier is applying only when the question is talking about the banking system. Then only the credit creation process is applied there. So again, in this question also, the question is talking about a commercial bank is having an excess reserve of 500 million rupees. Currently, the bank is operating under a statutory reserve ratio of 12%. Part A. If this bank holds a total deposit of 6,000 million rupees, what is the amount of cash reserves held by this bank? We are supposed to identify the amount of cash reserve this bank is holding at the moment, and the question gives us the statutory reserve ratio as 12%. So first of all, we will calculate the statutory reserve of this bank. First of all, we will calculate the statutory reserve held by this commercial bank. How do we calculate? We are given the total deposit as 6,000 and they have given us the statutory reserve ratio as 12%. So 12% of 6,000 is the minimum amount of cash reserve this bank should maintain, that is their statutory reserve. So 720 is the statutory reserve based on the existing deposit of the commercial bank and the statutory reserve ratio. And then if we go back to the question, it says that they are having an excess reserve of 500 million rupees. What we are supposed to do is to calculate the amount of cash reserves. Even with the previous question we discussed that the cash reserve comprises of both. Inside the cash reserve we identify both the statutory reserve as well as the excess reserve. Statutory reserve as well as the excess reserve. Statutory reserve as well as the excess reserve. How much is the statutory reserve? Statutory reserve is 720. Excess reserve is given in the question as 500. So therefore 1220. Here they have given it in million rupees. So therefore 1220 million rupees is the amount of cash reserve this bank is holding at the moment based on the given information. Right. Next one. If this bank receives a new cash deposit of 1000 million rupees and offers a loan of 300 million rupees, what is the new amount of excess reserves held by this bank? Two transactions are identified in part B. One is the bank is receiving a new cash deposit of 1000 million rupees. Other one is this bank is offering a loan of 300 million rupees. So we are supposed to identify the new amount of excess reserves held by this commercial bank. Right. So we already identified that the deposit held by the commercial bank is 6,000 and the cash reserve at the moment is 1220 before the receipt of the new deposit. So we will calculate the new deposit figure. They already had a deposit of 6,000 and they received a new deposit of 1,000. Altogether the deposits of the bank will go up to 7,000. The deposits of the bank will go up to 7,000 and we will calculate the new cash reserve. They already had a cash reserve of 1220, right? A new deposit is received by a bank means what? In one hand, that will create a cash asset a cash reserve of 1000 to the bank, because the person who deposits money will deposit that in cash, no? So therefore, in one hand the bank will receive cash. In one hand the bank will receive cash. So it creates a cash asset to the bank. On the other hand, the bank becomes liable to pay that money. The bank becomes liable to pay that money at any time they are demanding, the deposit holders are demanding their money. So whenever a bank collects a deposit, that will create a liability to that bank to pay that off at any time they demand. So receipt of a new deposit means what? In one hand it will be adding to the deposits, on the other hand it will be adding to the cash reserves of the bank. So therefore, the new amount of cash reserves this bank is having will be how much? 2220. Go back to the question, right? If this bank receives a new cash deposit of 1000 million rupees and offers a loan of 300 million rupees, what is the new amount of excess reserves? So we calculated the cash reserve after the receipt of the new deposit, right? So from this 2200 only, from this 2220 only, this bank is offering a loan of 300. So from bank's point of view, they are offering a loan means what? In one hand, it creates a loan asset to the bank. In one hand, it creates a loan asset to the bank. The bank offers a loan means what? So that borrower has to pay it back to the bank. No? So from bank's point of view, it is a receivable balance. It's an asset to the bank. On the other hand, the bank loses cash. There is a cash outflow from the bank. The cash asset decreases, the loan asset goes up. So therefore, when arriving at the new amount of cash reserve, the new deposit should be added, the loan offered should be deducted. So therefore, 1920 is the cash reserve after these two transactions, that is after accepting the new deposit and offering the loan. We'll go back to the question. If this bank receives a new cash deposit of 1000 million rupees and offers a loan of 300 million rupees, what is the new amount of excess reserves held by this bank? Now we already calculated the cash reserve this bank is having after these two transactions. So we are supposed to calculate the excess reserve, no? So for that, we will calculate the statutory reserve of this bank. We will calculate the statutory reserve of this bank. How do we get the statutory reserve? The new amount of deposit the bank is holding how much? 7000. Statutory reserve ratio is how much? 12%. So 12% of 7000 is 840. This is 12% of 7000 is how much? 840. Now we can calculate the excess reserve. How? Excess reserve equals to cash reserve minus the statutory reserve. The cash reserve held by this bank is how much? 1920. We already calculated it. From this, we need to deduct the statutory reserve we calculated in the previous step, 840. So therefore, the excess reserve held by this bank is 0, 8, 0 and 1. 1080 is the excess reserve held by this bank after these two transactions. Right. as I told you, within the first set of questions I am doing some calculations along with a single bank to show you the applications of a single bank. I told you that when the question is talking about a single bank, no deposit multiplier is applied at all, and the credit creation process is not applied to a single bank. The credit creation applies only when the question is talking about the whole banking system, right? So therefore, within the first few questions we are focusing on a single bank, so no credit creation applies here, right? So we answered the part B. If this bank receives a new cash deposit of 1000 million rupees and offers a loan of 300 million rupees, what is the new amount of excess reserves held by this bank? So we calculated the new deposit, we calculated the new cash reserve, we calculated the new statutory reserve. So from the cash reserve, by deducting the statutory reserve, we obtained the excess reserve, right? We will go to the next question, question number 3. We will read the question. Given below is the balance sheet of a commercial bank operates within the banking system. Again, see, the question is talking about one commercial bank. So at the initial step itself, you need to carefully read the question and see whether the question is talking about a single bank or whether the question is talking about the whole banking system. Whether the question is talking about a single bank or else the question is talking about the whole banking system. So again, given below is the balance sheet of a commercial bank operates within the banking system. So stating that it is operating within the banking system does not mean that the question is talking about the whole banking system, but the question is talking about a single bank operates within the banking system. Equity 7,500, deposits 8,000, required reserve 1,600, excess reserve 1,400, securities 4,000, loans 8,500. So the balance sheet is given in this way. So we will see what they are expecting from us to do. Part A, calculate the legal reserve ratio imposed on this bank. Statutory reserve ratio, required reserve ratio, legal reserve ratio, all these terms are used to identify the same thing. It is the percentage imposed by the central bank on the commercial banks to maintain the minimum amount of cash reserves from the total deposit they collected from the general public. So the statutory reserve is obtained by multiplying the total deposit with the statutory reserve ratio. So we will answer the part A, calculate the legal reserve ratio imposed on the bank. So we will go back to the question, the balance sheet given, right? Again, the statutory reserve ratio is always depending only upon the total deposit. Just because they are having equity or some other liabilities, we are not supposed to take the total of it to calculate the statutory reserve of a commercial bank. The statutory reserve of a commercial bank should always be calculated based on the total deposit of that respective bank. The total deposit of that respective bank, right? So the deposit is how much? Based on this balance sheet, it is 8,000. And then the required, so the cash reserves of the commercial bank, the cash reserves of this commercial bank are given in a specific way. What is that specific way? They are giving us the required reserve separately and then the excess reserve separately. So required reserve for a deposit figure of 8,000 is how much? Is 1,600. The total figure of these two is the cash reserve of this commercial bank. So currently this commercial bank is having a cash reserve of how much? 3,000. This commercial bank is having a total cash reserve of 3,000. 1,600 plus 1400. From that 3000 of cash reserves, 3000 million of cash reserves, the minimum required reserve for a deposit of 8000 is 1600. Even though they are having a cash balance of 3000 million rupees at the moment, based on the rule imposed by the central bank, the minimum amount of cash reserves this commercial bank should hold is only 1600. So, there is an excess cash reserve of 1400 million. So, if they want to offer loans, this 1400 can be offered as loans, right. So, we are given the deposit figure and we are given the required reserve, right. And what we are supposed to do here? We are supposed to calculate the legal reserve ratio or the statutory reserve ratio. So, we can again say statutory reserve ratio equals to SRR is standing for statutory reserve ratio. Statutory reserve, the minimum amount of cash reserve over the total deposit they are holding at the moment multiplied by 100. So, the question says that the required reserve or the minimum reserve is 1600 for a total deposit of 8000 multiplied by 100. So, the statutory reserve ratio is how much? The statutory reserve ratio is 20%. So, this is how you should answer the part A of the question based on the given information. So, we answered the part A, calculate the legal reserve ratio, or in other words the statutory reserve ratio, or in other words the required reserve ratio. Part B, what is the new amount of excess reserves of this bank if the public withdraws 800 million rupees from this bank? What is the new amount of excess reserves of this bank if the public withdraws 800 million rupees from this bank? BBC. So, again we are supposed to calculate the excess reserves after a withdrawal of 800. We will go back to the balance sheet. They are having a deposit of 8000, and as I already showed you, the cash balance they are having at the moment is 3000 altogether. So, in order to calculate the statutory reserve ratio, the cash reserves they have broken into two categories and given in this question. But afterwards, after calculating the statutory reserve ratio, from that point onwards to do any kind of a calculation, you should take the whole cash reserve they are holding. Based on the total cash reserve they are having, only any calculation should be done. So, only up to the point of calculating the statutory reserve ratio we used the cash reserve into categories as required reserve and the excess reserve. But for a calculation what we are doing thereafter, we should take the total of it as cash reserves and should do the calculation. So, the deposit is 8000, the cash reserve is 3000. So, based on this we are supposed to calculate the excess reserve after a withdrawal of after a withdrawal of 800 million. So, the new deposit they previously had a deposit of 8000, from that only a withdrawal of 800 is taking place. So, the new amount of cash new amount of deposit is 7200, and we will calculate the new cash reserve of this bank. New cash reserve, they had a cash reserve of 3000. When a withdrawal of 800 is taken place, that will be deducted in one hand from the deposits and on the other hand from the cash reserves. So, cash reserves will go down to 2200. Cash reserves will go down to 2200. The withdrawal took place, reduces from the deposits as well as from the cash reserves. because the withdrawal takes place in cash. And what we are supposed to do is to calculate the new excess reserve, right. So, for that we will calculate the new statutory reserve now. New statutory reserve. The previous statutory reserve was for the previous deposit, no. So, the new statutory reserve is the deposit 7,200. The statutory reserve ratio is the same, 20%. So, 20% of 7,200 is 1,440. 20% of 7,200 is 1,440. Now, we will calculate the new excess reserve. That is what we are supposed to find out. How do we get it? From the cash reserve they have, we have to deduct the statutory reserve. We calculated the cash reserve, how much? 2,200. Also, we calculated the statutory reserve, how much? 1,440. Therefore, the excess reserve held by this bank is 0, 6, 760. So, this is how we calculate the excess reserve held by this commercial bank by deducting the statutory reserve from the cash reserve. Right. So, we answered both sections of the question. We will move on to the new question. Question number 4. Given below is the balance sheet of a commercial bank operates within the banking system. Right? Liabilities, deposits. Under the liabilities they have given deposits 20,000. Under the assets they have given reserves 6,000, securities 4,000 and then loans 10,000. Part A. If the bank operates under a statutory reserve ratio of 20%, what is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer? If the bank operates under a statutory reserve ratio of 20%, what is the maximum amount of new loan this bank can offer? We will see. So, as I told you, when the question is talking about a single bank, the maximum loan a commercial bank can offer as at a given point of time is the amount of excess reserve they are having as at that given point of time. Excess reserve means the amount of cash reserve a commercial bank is holding exceeding the minimum required amount of reserves. Right. So, based on this we will calculate the excess reserve. Right. So, we will have to calculate the statutory reserve first and then the excess reserve afterwards. How do we get the statutory reserve? As we already discussed, statutory reserve is the deposit, whatever the deposit they hold at the moment, multiplied by the statutory reserve ratio. Right. We will go back to the question. The deposit is 20,000. The statutory reserve ratio given is 20%. So, deposits 20,000, the statutory reserve ratio they are currently facing for is 20%. So, therefore, 4,000 is the statutory reserve. With that we can calculate the excess reserve. Excess reserve is cash reserve minus statutory reserve. Cash reserve held by the bank is 6,000. So, from the cash reserve 6,000, we need to deduct the statutory reserve 4,000. Therefore, the excess reserve held by this commercial bank is how much? 2,000. So, what do they ask from us? What is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer? Right. So, we calculated the excess reserve. the excess reserve they hold only can offer as loans. So you should say therefore maximum amount of new loan is, I will write under this how much, rupees 2000 million. So this is how we calculate the maximum amount of new loans. Again, in relation to a single bank, the maximum loan a single bank can offer always is the excess reserve they are holding at a given point of time. Right. So we answered the part A. We will now move on to the part B of the question. Prepare the balance sheet of this bank if it offers a new loan of 1000 million. Right. If we go back to the previous balance sheet, they are having a deposit of 2000, reserves of 6000, securities 4000 and loans 10,000. This is the current position. And we calculated that if they wish, they can offer a maximum loan of 2000. They are having the capacity of offering a maximum loan of 2000. But now the question says that the bank is offering a loan of 1000. Now the question says that the bank is offering a loan of how much? 1000. Right. So we are supposed to identify the new balance sheet. So when a loan is offered, what happens is, in one hand that amount of loan will be added to the loan asset of the bank. On the other hand, that will be deducted from the cash reserves. The amount of loan this bank is offering is 1000. So that loan is added to amount of loan offered is added to the loans and deducted from cash reserves. So it should be deducted from cash reserves and then it should be added to the loans, right? So what we are supposed to do is to prepare the balance sheet. So when you are preparing the balance sheet, we already discussed about the adjustments that we should do. No impact on deposits. The deposits will be as it is at 20,000. But reserves will go down by 1000. And therefore the new amount of reserves will be, previously they had a reserve of 6000. So new reserve figure will be 5000 after offering a loan of 1000. They had a security figure of 4000 and that doesn't affect, and that will be stating as it is as 4000. But loans will be increased by 1000. Previously it was 10,000 and the new loan figure will be 11,000. New loan figure will be 11,000. So this would be the balance sheet of the bank after offering the new loan of 20,000. Simply it is deducting from reserves and adding it to the loans. Right. This is how we arrive at the answer for part B of the question. We will move on to the part C. Prepare the balance sheet of this bank if it receives a new deposit of 5,000 million. Right. So this is the existing balance sheet and now they are receiving a new deposit of 5,000 million. So what happens after a receipt of deposit, right? After a receipt of deposits, that will be added to the deposits in one hand plus 5,000 and that will be added to the cash reserves. As a result of receiving a new deposit, it will be added to the deposits and it will be added to the cash reserves. So therefore, the new deposit figure of this bank should be 25,000 the new cash reserve of the bank should be 10,000. So based on that, the total should also be changed. Right, this is how we arrive at the answer for part C. Right, the balance sheet of the bank after receiving a new deposit of 5,000 million. So you can see it is added to the deposits and added to the reserves, a very simple adjustment. And we will move on to the last part D of the question. What is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer after receiving the new deposit? Now we prepare the balance sheet of the bank after receiving the new deposit. Now in this question, they are asking us to identify the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer. Bank can offer after receiving this new deposit. What is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer after receiving the new deposit? I told you that at any given point of time, the maximum loan a bank can offer is the amount of excess reserves that bank is having at that given point of time. So we are supposed to calculate the excess reserve here. So I will do the calculation on the top of the balance sheet. So the statutory reserve, how do we get? The deposit they are holding is 25,000 multiplied by the statutory reserve ratio is given as 20,000. So the same thing applies. So that doesn't change as far as the question is talking about a change in the statutory reserve ratio. So 25,000 into 20% is 5,000. So the amount of excess reserve this bank is having, cash reserve 10,000, minimum required reserve is 5,000, which is in other words the statutory reserve. Therefore, there is an excess reserve of 5,000 with this commercial bank. So this excess reserve only they can offer as loans. So therefore, this will be the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer after receiving the new deposit. So we need to calculate the excess reserve. That excess reserve only they can offer as loans at a given point of time, as this question is talking about a single bank. Right. So we will now move on to the question number 5. We'll read the question. A commercial bank which operates under a statutory reserve ratio of 15% has collected a deposit of rupees 8,000 million. Currently, the bank is holding an excess reserve of 1,500 million. If there are no other assets and liabilities other than deposits, reserves and loans. So the question is talking about a balance sheet having only the deposits, reserves and then the loans, a simple balance sheet. And again the question is talking about a single bank. Right, again the details given are the statutory reserve ratio is 15%. Right, the deposits collected by the bank is 8,000 million. They are having an excess reserve of 1,500 million. Right, based on that we are supposed to identify the amount of loans they are having at the moment. Right, so again see, the deposit is 8,000, statutory reserve ratio is 15%. So with that we will first calculate the statutory reserve. 8,000 into 15% is the statutory reserve, right? How much is it? 1,200. So with this we can calculate the cash reserve held by the commercial bank. It is the sum of both the statutory reserve, and if there is any excess reserve, that also should be added. So we already calculated the statutory reserve 1,200. The excess reserve is given in the question 1,500. The excess reserve is 1,500. Therefore, the cash reserve is how much? 2,700. Right. But we are supposed to calculate what is the amount of loans this bank has offered. So with a simple balance sheet only we are supposed to do this. Deposits 8,000. Now we calculated the cash reserve, how much? Cash reserve of the bank is 2,700. So the rest figure should have offered as loans. The rest figure should have offered as loans. This side the total is 8,000. Here the total is 8,000. From that, when you deduct 2,700, you will get 5,300 as the answer. So again, what do they ask from us in part A? What is the amount of loans this bank has offered? They have offered a loan figure of 5,300. This is how we should calculate the amount of loans this bank has offered, right? And part B, if a customer withdraws rupees 1,000 million from his account, what is the maximum amount of loans this bank can offer? Now we got the new balance sheet, no? We got the new balance sheet. I will prepare the balance sheet again with I am using D to represent deposits 8,000, R to represent reserves 2,700, and then L to represent loans 5,300. This is the balance sheet. Current balance sheet. Total 8,000 here. Total is 8,000. Right now, what do they ask in part B? If a customer withdraws rupees 1,000 million from his account, what is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer, right? So if a customer withdraws 1,000 again from his account, that should be deducted from deposits in one hand. On the other hand, it should be deducted from reserves as well. The cash withdrawal should be deducted from deposits in one hand. On the other hand, it should be deducted from reserves as well. So the new amount of deposits this bank is having is how much? Therefore 7,000. This is the new amount of deposits they are having after that withdrawal. Also, how much is the cash reserve they are holding after this withdrawal? 2700 minus 1000 is 1700. 1700. So the balance sheet should be added up to 7000. So this is the current balance sheet after the withdrawal of 1000. What do they ask from us? If a customer withdraws rupees 1000 million from his account, what is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer? So again, what we are supposed to do is to calculate the excess reserve. How do we do it? So statutory reserve first, deposit 7000. The statutory reserve ratio is 15%. So 15% of 7000 is 1050. So therefore excess reserve is the cash reserve they hold 1700 minus the statutory reserve 1050. So the excess reserve they are holding is 650. Excess reserve they are holding is how much? 650. So the question is, what is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer? Whatever the excess reserve they are holding can be offered as loans. So this is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer. Right. So this is how we answer the part B of the question. Right. We will move on to the next question. Question number 6. A commercial bank operates under a statutory reserve ratio of 25%. Collected a deposit of rupees 10,000 million and offered loans to the maximum extent. Again, the question is still talking about a single commercial bank. So we are still with a single commercial bank. So no credit creation applies, no deposit multiplier applies, right? So they have collected a deposit of 10,000, statutory reserve ratio is 25%, right? And they have offered loans to the maximum extent. In part A, they expect us to prepare the balance sheet of this commercial of this bank after collecting a new deposit of 3,000 million. So in order to explain this, I will draw the current balance sheet and I will do the adjustment of new deposit to the current balance sheet and will show you how to obtain the new balance sheet. So they have collected a deposit of 10,000 when operating under a statutory reserve ratio of 25%. So deposits 10,000. I am using the 4 deposits. Reserves 25% of it is 2,500. So they have offered loans to the maximum extent means what? They are keeping only the statutory reserve in terms of cash reserves. The rest figure is offered as loans. Therefore, the loans offered by them in total is how much? 7,500. Loans offered by them in total is how much? 7,500. Right. So this is what the balance sheet of the bank. But what they ask, that is not the answer for part A. Why? Prepare the balance sheet of this bank after collecting a new deposit of 3,000 million. So I already discussed with you that when the bank receives a deposit, that should be added to the deposits in one hand. On the other hand, that same figure should be added to the reserves, because that 3,000 of deposit will be received in terms of cash now. So that will be added to the cash reserves in one hand. On the other hand, that will be added to the deposits. So therefore, we are supposed to prepare the balance sheet after receiving the new deposit. So the new deposit is 13,000 the new reserve figure is 5,500. Right. So therefore, this side the total is 13,000. This side the total is again 13,000. So this is how we answer the part A of the question regarding the balance sheet of this bank after receiving a new deposit of 3,000. Part B, what is the maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer if a customer withdraws a deposit of 1,000 million from this bank? So we can do the adjustment to this bank and get the new balance sheet, and with the help of the new balance sheet we can answer the question. So a withdrawal takes place from this bank means what? That should be deducted from the deposits in one hand, on the other hand that should be deducted from the reserves. So therefore the new amount of deposits will be 12,000 and the new amount of cash reserves will be 4,500. So in order to calculate the maximum amount of new loans, we should calculate the excess reserve, because excess reserve only they can offer as loans. So first of all, we will calculate the statutory reserve. First of all, we will calculate the statutory reserve when they are offering under a statutory reserve ratio of 25%. The minimum required reserve for a deposit of 12,000 is 3,000. And then we can calculate the excess reserve is cash reserve minus the statutory reserve. Cash reserve held by them is 4,500. Statutory reserve is 3,000. Therefore, the excess reserve held by this bank is 1,500. So what they want us to identify is the maximum amount of new loans. The excess reserve only they can offer as loans. Therefore, maximum amount of new loans this bank can offer is 1,500 million. We'll start the 7th question. Right. Question number 7. A commercial bank operates under a statutory reserve ratio of 20%, collected a deposit of 6,000 from a customer. Part A. Prepare the balance sheet of this bank if it offered loans to the maximum extent. So up to this point of this question, they are talking about a single bank. Part B. What is the maximum amount of deposits the whole banking system can create as a result of the above deposit? So in the part A, they are talking about the operation of that respective bank, and when we move on to the part B, the question is talking about the whole banking system. The credit creation process is talking about a process where the first bank receives a certain amount of deposit. That bank keeps that minimum amount of reserves that bank should maintain, and then the remaining figure is offered as loans. The remaining figure is offered as loans. whatever the loan offered by the first bank is gone to a second bank as a deposit. The second bank will keep the minimum amount of reserves that they should maintain from that, and the remaining figure is offered as loans. That loan offered by the second bank will be gone to a third bank as a deposit. That bank will keep the minimum required reserve from that, and then the remaining figure is offered as loans. The loan offered by the third bank is gone to a fourth bank as a deposit. Is gone to a fourth bank as a deposit. So that fourth bank keeps the minimum required amount of reserves with it and offers the rest figure as a loan. Like this, the process goes on and on and on and on, until the excess reserves of one bank becomes zero. Until the excess reserves of one bank becomes zero, the process continues. The process continues until the excess reserves of one bank become zero. At the end of the process, what happens is, the banking system, that is when you add up the balance sheets of all the individual banks, you will identify a total deposit which is a number of times of the initial deposit received by the first bank. This overall process is what we identify as the credit creation process of commercial banks. Before answering the part B, I will give a brief explanation on this credit creation process along with the section A. We will see. Prepare the balance sheet of this bank if it offered loans to the maximum extent. They received a deposit of 6,000 and then they are operating under a statutory reserve ratio of 20%. So see, the first bank receives a deposit of 6,000. The statutory reserve ratio is 20%, and the question says that they are keeping only the statutory reserve and offers the rest figure as a loan. So the balance sheet of the first bank will be this. So according to the credit creation process, what do we identify? The loan offered by the first bank will be gone to a second bank as a deposit. So that 4,800 will be gone to the second bank as a deposit. What does that bank do? Keeps the minimum required reserve from that. For 20% of 4,800 is 960. And the rest figure will be offered as loans. The loan offered by that bank will be therefore 3,840. The loan offered by the second bank will be 3,840. So see, first bank collected a deposit of 6,000, kept the statutory reserve with them and offered the rest figure as a loan. The loan offered by the first bank is gone to a second bank as a deposit. So the second bank keeps the statutory reserve from it and offers the rest figure as a loan. So I will prepare a balance sheet for the third bank as well, but as I want to show you the balance sheet of the banking system, I will identify the third bank with a new deposit and before offering any loans. So the loan offered by the second bank will be gone to the third bank as a deposit, 3,840. If they don't offer any loans, because I want to identify the balance sheet before offering any loans, the bank will have a reserve figure of 3,840. So again, I prepared the balance sheet of the third bank after receiving the deposit and before offering any loans. After receiving the deposit and before offering any loans. Right? So, the first bank, second bank and the third bank. Right? So, after going up to the third bank, if you think of preparing the balance sheet of the banking system immediately after receiving the deposit by the third bank, now you should understand that this is going on as a process. The total deposit the banking system is having will be the sum of these three figures. Right? The banking system will have a total deposit of how much? I am again doing this with the first three banks only, right? Like you should understand this process should continue. How? The third bank received a deposit of 3,840. That bank will keep the statutory reserve and then the rest figure will be offered as a loan, and that loan will be received to a fourth bank as a deposit. Right? The loan that will be received to a third bank as a deposit, and that deposit from that deposit the fourth bank is keeping only the minimum required reserve, and then the excess reserve will be offered as loans. Like this it will be continuing. Only thing is the first bank offered a loan of 4,800, but the second bank is offering something less than that, 3,840. The third bank will be able to offer even something less than that after deducting 20% of 3,840. Like this, when the process continues, the excess reserve created in each bank gradually goes down. When the process continues, the excess reserve created in each bank gradually goes down. So, until the excess reserves of one bank becomes 0, the process will be continuing. Until the excess reserves of one bank becomes 0, the process will be continuing. Right? So, that is what we identify as the credit creation process of commercial banks. But I wanted to show you how the banking system creates a total deposit which is more than the initial deposit they received with the help of the first three banks. So, the first bank has a deposit of 6,000, the second bank has a deposit of 4,800, right? The third bank has a deposit of 3,840. The total is how much? 14,640. How much is the total? 14,640. So, the deposits held by the banking system, again I am telling you that I did only for the first three banks, right? The total deposits the three banks are having at the moment is 14,640. The loans offered by the three banks I identified only in the first two banks. First bank offered a loan of 4,800. The second bank offered a loan of 3,840. The total of these two is how much? 8,640. So, the loans offered by the second bank is 3,840. Sorry, the loans offered by the two banks altogether is 8,640. How about the reserves? The first bank has a reserve figure of 1,200. The second bank has a reserve figure of 960. The third bank has a reserve figure of 3,840. The total of these three is how much? 6,000. What is this 6,000? Actually, this 6,000 is the initial deposit they collected from the general public. The initial deposit they collected from the general public is the amount of reserves the banking system is holding at any given point of time. Right? The banking system received a cash deposit of 6,000 at the beginning of the process. Apart from that 6,000 what they received at the beginning of the process, nothing else is received by the banking system. So at any given point of time, if you prepare the balance sheet of the banking system, at any stage, if you prepare the balance sheet of the banking system, as reserves what you get is the amount of money they collected from the general public at the beginning of the process. The amount of money they collected from the general public at the beginning of the process. Right? So, therefore, at any given stage when we are preparing the balance sheet of the banking system, as reserves what you get is the amount of money they collected from the general public. So, you can see that they are having a reserve figure of 6,000. So, this is the balance sheet of the banking system with the first 3 banks only. But now see, the first bank received a deposit of rupees 6,000. The first bank received a deposit of 6,000. That bank kept the statutory reserve with them and offered the rest figure as a loan. The loan offered by the first bank was deposited to the second bank. The second bank kept the statutory reserve with them and offered the rest figure as a loan. And that loan is received by the third bank as a deposit. We stopped the process from that point, but you need to understand that the third bank also can keep statutory reserve with them and offer the rest figure as a loan. Right? But then with the first 3 banks itself, the banking system has created a total deposit of 14,640. But the amount of cash the banking system is having is only the 6,000 what they received from the general public. After receiving a cash deposit of 6,000, rupees, the first 3 banks themselves get together and create a total deposit of 14,640. Right? But this is just the first 3 banks. This can be gone to a 4th bank, a 5th bank, 6th bank, 7th bank. Like that the process will be definitely continuing. So, at the end of the process, the banking system will create a total deposit worth a number of times of the initial deposit they collected from the general public. So, this overall process is what we identify as the credit creation process of the commercial banks. One thing what we need to understand here is the credit creation process does not talking about a situation where the banks are actually creating new money, new currency notes and coins. No. This according to my example here, explanation here, they received a cash deposit of 6,000, a cash reserve of 6,000 at the beginning of the process. At any given point, if you prepare the balance sheet of the banking system, as the reserves what we find is only that 6,000 and nothing else. So, the amount of cash reserves collected by the commercial banking system will remain unchanged at any given stage. Whatever the loan offered by one bank is received to another bank as a deposit. It goes on and on. So, no cash outflow is identified here. So, what they received as cash at the beginning will be there at any stage as cash. But with the numbers they offer as loans, the loans are offered by the commercial banks in terms of checks, like they are creating new deposits. They don't have cash worth of 14,640, but they are having a deposit liability worth of 14,640. So, this process is what we identify as the credit creation process. So, in practice we can't prepare all the balance sheets of individual banks and get together and add them together and say no, this is the total deposit the banking system can create. I prepared 3 banks. but we don't know until what bank it continues. It may be like 100th bank, like sometimes maybe be going for some 150 or 200 odd banks. So we cannot like physically prepare the balance sheet of each bank and add them together and get the balance sheet of the banking system when the process is completed. Instead, what do? We use some formulas to get the total deposit the banking system can create when the process is completed. What do we mean by the process is completed? What do we mean by the process is completed? Every bank offers loans to the maximum extent and all the excess reserves are offered as loans. All the excess reserves are offered as loans. So therefore, I prepared the balance sheets of the first three banks, and with that I explained you the credit creation process. So we use few formulas to get the total figures. The total deposit can be calculated by using the formula initial deposit multiplied by the deposit multiplier. Initial deposit multiplied by the deposit multiplier. The total deposit the banking system can create is initial deposit multiplied by the deposit multiplier. So according to this calculation, what we did, the first bank received a deposit of 6,000 and the banking system operates under a statutory reserve ratio of 20%. The deposit multiplier is calculated by using the formula 1 divided by statutory reserve ratio, gives you 5 as the answer. So the banking system has the ability of creating a total deposit of 30,000 from the initial deposit they collected from the general public. Initial deposit into the deposit expansion multiplier. So we discussed about 3 stages. So if this process is continued until the excess reserves of one bank become 0, at that point only now the ability of offering loans becomes 0. Up to the arrival of that point, each bank can offer loans. So the process is over only if the excess reserves of one bank became 0. If the process continued until that point where the excess reserves of one bank become 0, we say that the credit creation process is completed. We say that the credit creation process is completed. So the credit creation process will be completed only when every bank offered loans to the maximum extent. After completing the credit creation process, the total deposits the banking system can create can be obtained by using the formula initial deposit multiplied by the deposit expansion multiplier. Can be calculated by using the formula initial deposit multiplied by the deposit expansion multiplier. So initial deposit is 6,000, deposit multiplier is 5, so 6,000 times 5 is 30,000 is the total deposit the banking system can create. Also, we use another formula to calculate the total loans the banking system can create. So first, according to our presentation, the first bank offered a loan of 4,800, the second bank offered a loan of 3,840. Like that, the total loans the banking system can create with a certain amount of initial deposit can be calculated by using the formula initial deposit multiplied by, not the initial deposit, sorry, the initial loan for the initial excess reserve, the loan offered by the first bank, multiplied by the deposit multiplier. I will use capital K to represent the deposit multiplier. So the first bank offered a loan of 4,800. Think you can remember we showed by preparing a balance sheet, and we calculated the deposit multiplier. So this 4,800 times 5, 24,000 is the total loans the banking system can create. This is again when the whole credit creation process is completed, right? When the whole credit creation process is completed, the total deposits and the total loans the banking system can create. So with this, I wanted to give you a brief explanation regarding the credit creation process of commercial banks. So I told you that we did the first few questions, first 6 questions with the operation of a single bank. So when we are focusing on the operation of a single bank, simply there is no credit creation. There is no credit creation when we are talking about the operation of a single bank, right? Why is it? The banks are like a single bank is not in a position of creating credits. So the credit creation process applies only when the question is talking about the whole banking system. So with this question, I gave a brief introduction regarding the credit creation process that takes place in the banking system. So we will go back to the questions. First part is to prepare the balance sheet of this bank if it offered loans to the maximum extent. Actually, we already prepared that bank. The part A is talking about the first bank. First bank collected a deposit of 6,000. The statutory reserve ratio is 20%, so that bank will keep that statutory reserve of 1,200, and then the remaining figure is the excess reserve will be offered as loans. So the total deposit is 6,000, and the total of these two figures is also the same, 6,000. This is how we prepare the balance sheet of the first bank, prepare the balance sheet of this bank if it offered loans to the maximum extent. So we prepare, right? Part B, what is the maximum amount of deposits the whole banking system can create? What is the maximum amount of deposits the whole banking system can create as a result of the above deposit? Now we discussed a method of arriving at the total deposit and the total loans. No? Actually, I calculated and showed you. Initial deposit into the deposit expansion multiplier is the total deposit the banking system can create. Initial loan, the loan offered by the first bank into the deposit expansion multiplier, is the total loan the banking system can create. So we will arrive at the balance sheet of the banking system. The deposit is initial deposit 6,000. The deposit expansion multiplier, again deposit multiplier is calculated by using the formula 1 divided by statutory reserve ratio. So 1 divided by 20%, the deposit multiplier is 5. Deposit multiplier is 5. So 6,000 times 5 is the total deposit the banking system can create. The initial deposit into the deposit multiplier. Initial deposit into the deposit multiplier, 30,000 is the total deposit the banking system can create. The total loan, how do we calculate? I told you the loan offered by the first bank is 4,800, the initial excess reserve, or in other words the initial loan, that is into the deposit multiplier is 24,000. So the total loan the banking system can create is how much? 24,000. And then what next we need is the reserve figure. Reserves represent the amount of cash the commercial banking system collected from the general public. So they, in this example, they collected a cash deposit of 6,000 at the beginning. So that 6,000 won't be increased or even won't be decreased. Why it won't be increased? Because the question is not talking about a situation where the currency notes and coins are expanded. No. Only the loans, only the deposits in numbers, loans in numbers, not physical cash. On the other hand, that won't be going down. Why? We assume that there is no cash outflow from the banking system. Every loan offered by one bank, the loans are offered in terms of checks in one hand. On the other hand, these loans are deposited back in the banking system. So there is no cash outflow, like the credit creation process is developed on these assumptions, right? So therefore, as the reserves, what we always find is the amount of cash reserves the commercial banking system collected at the beginning of the process, right? So in a simple balance sheet like this one, the total deposits is 30,000. The total of these two figures is also 30,000, right? So this is how we prepare the balance sheet of the banking system along with the full credit creation. So we answered the part B as well. We'll move on to the part C. Prepare the balance sheet of the banking system. Right, a little issue. Actually, I prepared the balance sheet of the banking system with the full credit creation here. So therefore, this should be the answer for part C. So based on this, I will answer the part B separately. The balance sheet of the whole banking system with the full credit creation. The part B is to calculate the total deposit the banking system can create. The total deposit the banking system can create is the initial deposit into the deposit expansion multiplier. So the total deposit the banking system can create is, along with this, is 30,000. So afterwards, we are supposed to prepare the balance sheet with the full credit creation. So that will show a total deposit of 30,000, which we actually calculated here. The total loan of 24,000, I showed you how to calculate, and then the reserves 6,000. I think you understood the explanation. Right, we'll move on to the next question, question number 8. Given below is the balance sheet of a commercial banking system. Given below is the balance sheet of a commercial banking system. Liabilities: deposits 12,000, reserves 5,000, loans 7,000. Deposits 12,000, reserves 5,000, loans 7,000. We'll go to the questions. Again, I think I will go back to the balance sheet. So this question is talking about the balance sheet of the banking system. We'll see. Part A, calculate the statutory reserve ratio if this banking system, right? If this banking system. So again, this is not talking about a single bank. Instead, this question is talking about the whole banking system. If this banking system has an excess reserve of 2,000 rupees. Part B, prepare the balance sheet of this banking system again if they offered loans to the maximum extent. Right. So we'll go back to the given balance sheet. Carefully go through the balance sheet. Given below is the balance sheet of a commercial banking system. Deposits 12,000, reserves 5,000, and loans 7,000. In the previous discussion we discussed, I explained you that when one bank in the banking system receives a certain amount of cash deposit, like that deposit is gone throughout the banking system. The first bank keeps the statutory reserve, offers the remaining figure as a loan, and that loan will be deposited in the second bank. That bank keeps the statutory reserve and offers the rest figure as a loan, and that loan will be deposited in one bank in another bank in the banking system. Like that, the process goes on. The total deposits the banking system can create with a certain amount of initial deposit can be calculated by multiplying the initial deposit by the deposit multiplier. And then the total loan the banking system can create can be calculated by multiplying the initial loan by the deposit expansion multiplier. But there is a problem. The problem associated with this question is they have not given us the balance sheet of the first bank. If they have given us the balance sheet of the first bank, we could multiply the initial deposit by the deposit multiplier and get the total deposit. We could multiply the initial excess reserve by the deposit multiplier and could obtain the total loan. But if you carefully read this question, see, given below is the balance sheet of a commercial banking system. So here they have given us the balance sheet of a commercial banking system, right? The commercial banking system. But then if the commercial banking system completes the credit creation, like when one bank in the banking system receives a certain amount of cash, and if this is gone throughout the banking system, and if every bank offers loans to the maximum extent and prepare the balance sheet of the banking system, in other words, in a fully credit created balance sheet of the banking system, they cannot have excess reserves. If the banking system has excess reserves, what does it mean? They have the ability of further offering loans, no? So, in a balance sheet with full credit creation, there cannot be any excess reserves. But in this question it says, in part A, you can see, calculate the statutory reserve ratio of ratio if this banking system has an excess reserves of 2000 million. The question has given you the balance sheet of a banking system, but that banking system has excess reserves. Excess reserves are there with the banking system means what? They have not completed the credit creation, like they have gone to a certain extent, and then the total of those balance sheets are given here. In the previous example, I prepared the balance sheets of the first three banks and I added them together and showed you the balance sheet of the banking system. But that was not the balance sheet of the banking system with full credit creation, just the addition of the first three banks. Like this, in this question, they have given us the balance sheet of a banking system with excess reserves. Having excess reserves means what? They have not completed the credit creation process here, right? Anyway, we will calculate the statutory reserve ratio, right? So again, if you go back to the balance sheet, they are having a reserve figure of 5,000 at the moment. So with that, we will calculate the statutory reserve. How do you calculate the statutory reserve? It is from cash reserve by deducting the excess reserve. So the cash reserve held by this respective banking system is 5,000, that you can see by looking at the balance sheet. And in part A, they stated that they are having an excess reserve of 2,000. Therefore, the statutory reserve held by this bank is how much? 3,000. Statutory reserve for a deposit of 5,000. This is the current amount of deposit. So, how do we calculate the statutory reserve ratio? It is the statutory reserve divided by total deposit multiplied by 100. The statutory reserve is 3000 for a deposit of how much? 12,000 multiplied by 100. You will get the statutory reserve ratio as 25%. You will get the statutory reserve ratio as how much? 25%. Right? So we calculated the statutory reserve ratio. That is what they expect from us in the part A. Part B, prepare the balance sheet of this banking system if they offered loans to the maximum extent. Right? Prepare the balance sheet of the banking system if they offered loans to the maximum extent. In this question, they have given us the balance sheet of the banking system, but the balance sheet what they have given us is the balance sheet before completing the full credit creation. Is the balance sheet before completing the full credit creation. That is why they had the excess reserves. That is why they had the excess reserves. So they are having an excess reserve of 2000 million now according to the question. So if they are having an excess reserve of 2000 million, that excess reserve can be offered as a loan, even for one bank, even for the whole banking system. Whatever the excess reserve they hold can be offered as loans. But now we are talking about the banking system. So if one bank offered a loan, that loan will be gone to another bank as a deposit. That's what the credit creation process explains. Loan offered by every bank is deposited in another bank in the banking system. With that only the credit creation process works. One bank offers a loan and that loan goes as a deposit to another bank. That bank keeps the statutory reserve and offers the excess reserve as a loan. That loan is gone to another bank as a deposit. That bank keeps the statutory reserve and offers the rest figure as a loan. Like this the process continues. So if any banking system is having an excess reserve of 2000, right, the multiplier we all can calculate by using the formula 1 divided by statutory reserve ratio. 1 divided by 25% is 4, right? So 4 times worth of the initial 4 times worth of the excess reserve they hold worth of a deposit and a loan can be created by the banking system. Why is it? They are having an excess reserve of 2000 at the moment, right? This 2000 can be gone throughout the banking system. First bank offers a loan of 2000, that is gone as a deposit to another bank. That bank keeps the statutory reserve and offers the rest figure as a loan. That loan is gone to another bank as a deposit. Like this, the banking system can create a deposit of 8000 with an excess reserve of 2000. The loan offered by every bank is a deposit to another bank. So offering a loan of 2000 means it is creating a deposit of 2000. So therefore this 8000 will be added to the deposits in one hand, and on the other hand that will be added to the loans as well, because every loan offered by one bank is a deposit to another bank. So in this question they gave us the balance sheet of the banking system, but before completing the full credit creation. That is why they are having excess reserves. So if they gave us a balance sheet of the banking system with some excess reserves, that excess reserve can be multiplied by the deposit expansion multiplier, and the answer what we get shows the total deposit and the total new deposit and the total new loan the banking system can create with that excess reserve. So, they had an excess reserve of 2000 and the deposit multiplier is 4. So, 2000 times 4 is 8000. So, the banking system can create a total loan of 8000 and a total new deposit of 8000. So, that I added that 8000 to the deposits and to the loans, and with that we can get the balance sheet of the banking system with the full credit creation. Right. In another way, right, the balance sheet given here is for the banking system. There they say deposits 12,000, reserves 5,000 and loans 7,000. This is the balance sheet of the banking system. Right, what they have given us is the balance sheet of the banking system, and this is the given balance sheet of the banking system. Right. If you can remember, in the previous question which I used to explain the credit creation process, we identified an initial deposit of 6,000 and that banking system operated under a statutory reserve ratio of 20%. So, the first bank received a deposit of 6,000, kept 1,200 with them in terms of cash reserves and offered the rest 4,800 as a loan, and that 4,800 was received as a deposit to a second bank, and that bank kept 20% of it and offered the rest figure as a loan, and that loan was gone to a third bank as a deposit. I added the balance sheets of the first three banks and obtained a balance sheet for the banking system. There I told you that it is the balance sheet of the banking system before completing the credit creation, because I just added the first three banks and obtained it. Even in that balance sheet of the first three banks, the balance sheet of the banking system obtained by adding up the first three banks, there was a cash reserve of 6,000. What does this mean? At the beginning of the process, the first bank collected a deposit of 6,000 in cash, and that 6,000 is there throughout the banking system. That won't be changing as far as there is a cash outflow or a new cash inflow is there to the banking system. But we assume that there is no cash outflow from the banking system, or else there is no cash inflow to the banking system here. So, at any given stage, if you prepare the balance sheet for the banking system in a simple balance sheet having deposits, reserves and loans, that reserve figure shows the amount of cash this banking system collected at the beginning of the process. The amount of cash the banking system collected at the beginning of the process. So, here in this question, the cash reserves the banking system is holding is how much? Is 5,000. Even though this is the balance sheet of the banking system before completing the credit creation process, this banking system has a cash reserve of 5,000. Cash reserve of 5,000. What does this mean? This is the amount of money collected by the banking system from the general public. This is the actual cash they hold. Right? That should be the amount of money initially collected by one bank from the from the general public. So, therefore, taking that as the initial deposit, you can prepare the balance sheet of the first bank. So, if the first bank received a deposit of 5,000, they are having a cash reserve of 5,000 here, means they should have collected this 5,000 from the general public at one stage. And if the banking system operates under a statutory reserve ratio of 20%, 20% of 5,000 is 1,000. Rest 4,000 can be offered as loans by the first bank. So with the balance sheet of the banking, given balance sheet of the banking system, with the given balance sheet of the banking system, using the reserves, they have a reserve figure of 5,000, cash reserves of 5,000 of this banking system. Means that cash reserve of 5,000 should be the amount of money they collected from the general public at the initial stage. So using that 5,000, taking that as the initial deposit, I prepared the balance sheet of the first bank. I prepared the balance sheet of the first bank. With this we can arrive at the balance sheet of the banking system with full credit creation. So if the statutory reserve ratio is we calculated as 25%, not 20%. So if SRR is 25%, the deposit multiplier will be 4. That is, if the first bank received a deposit of 5,000, that times 4 worth of a total deposit can be created by the banking system. 5,000 times 4 is 20,000. And then first bank offers a loan of 4,000, right? 4,000 times 4, the banking system can create a loan of 16,000. The first bank received cash worth of 5,000, and that cash only the banking system is holding even at the end of the process. So even if the banking system gives us the balance sheet at an intermediary stage, balance sheet of the banking system, or else if they gave us the balance sheet of the banking system after completing the full credit creation, the amount of cash reserves shown in the balance sheet is the amount of cash what they collected from the general public at the initial stage. In other words, it is the initial deposit. So with that, I prepared the balance sheet of the first bank, and from that I am arriving at the balance sheet of the banking system with full credit creation. Now in this previous balance sheet, they had an excess reserve of there is a small issue. There is a little issue here because SRR is 20%, 25% means the 25% of 5,000 is 1,250. I prepared it for 20,000 previously. So the first bank can offer a loan of 3,750. So 5,000 times 4 is 20,000, and 3,750 times 4 is 15,000. If the statutory reserve ratio is 25%. So 5,000 times 4 is 20,000, 3,750 times 4 is 15,000. The initial amount of money they collected would be the amount of cash reserve they hold even at the end of the process, right? So here they had a cash reserve of 5,000, but they had an excess reserve of 2,000. That is why we identified that as the balance sheet of the banking system before completing the full credit creation, right? Because 25% of 12,000 is only 3,000, but they have a cash reserve of 5,000. But here 25% of 20,000 is exactly 5,000. So the cash reserve they hold is equal to the statutory reserve. There is no any excess reserves with the banking system. So here what did we do? We identified the initial deposit by looking at the balance sheet of the banking system. The cash reserve held by the banking system was the initial deposit. So, we prepared the balance sheet of the first bank, and from that we arrived at the balance sheet of the banking system. So, the answer for part B only we prepared. Prepare the balance sheet of this banking system if they offered loans to the maximum extent, that is this deposits 20,000, reserves 5,000, loans 15,000. How did we arrive at this answer? This was the given balance sheet. From that we identified the initial deposit based on the cash reserve they had. We prepared the balance sheet of the first bank, and from that we arrived at the balance sheet of the banking system with full credit creation. So, this is how we can arrive at the answer for part B. So, we will move on to the next question. Right, we will read the question. A commercial bank operates under a statutory reserve ratio of 20%, collected a deposit of rupees 50,000 from the public. What is the maximum loan this bank can offer as a direct result of this deposit? Talking about a single bank. We will read the part B as well. Prepare the balance sheet of the whole banking system after the full credit creation with the above deposit. So, in part they expect us to prepare the balance sheet of the first bank, and in part B they expect us to prepare the balance sheet of the banking system with the full credit creation. Right. So, the first bank collected a deposit of 50,000 and they operate under a statutory reserve ratio of 20%. Collected a deposit of 50,000. Statutory reserve ratio is 20%, means it's 10,000 here. So, the first bank can offer a loan of 40,000. So, this would be the balance sheet of the first bank. But what they ask from us in the question? What is the maximum loan this bank can offer as a direct result of this deposit? So, this is the maximum loan this bank can offer as a direct result of this deposit. The first bank can offer a maximum loan of rupees 40,000. Part B. Prepare the balance sheet of the whole banking system after the full credit creation with the above deposit. So, SRR is 20%, means how much is the deposit multiplier? Deposit multiplier is 1 divided by 20%, 1 divided by statutory reserve ratio is 5. So, we are supposed to prepare the balance sheet of the banking system with full credit creation. Right. So, initial deposit is 50,000, deposit multiplier is 5, 50,000 times 5, the banking system can create a total deposit worth of 250,000. The banking system can create a total deposit of 250,000. The reserves, we will calculate the reserve figure at last. The first bank offered a loan of 40,000, that is gone throughout the banking system. So, the total loans the banking system can create is 200,000. We discussed that whatever the money they collected from the general public at the beginning of the process, this process started with an initial deposit of 50,000. The first bank collected a deposit of 50,000 from the general public, and that is what is gone throughout the banking system by offering the excess reserve by every bank. but at the end of the process even, the banking system is having only that amount of cash. So the cash reserves of the bank should again be the same 50,000. So you can see that it is balancing to each side. So this is how we prepare the balance sheet of the banking system with the full credit creation. So always in a balance sheet having deposits, reserves and loans, whatever the money they collected at the beginning of the process would be the amount of cash the banking system is having at the end of the process as well. Right. So we answered the part B of the question. So we will move on to the next question. Question number 10. Following details are given in relation to the commercial banking system of a country. So again the question is talking about the commercial banking system. Whenever the question is talking about the commercial banking system, you need to understand that the credit creation applies there, or else the application of deposit multiplier will be there, because the question is talking about the banking system. So following details are given in relation to the commercial banking system of a country. The banking system operates under a statutory reserve ratio of 10%. Deposits 8,000, reserves 3,000, loans 5,000. We'll go to the questions. Part A. Prepare the balance sheet of this banking system if they offer loans to the maximum possible extent. So if we go back to the balance sheet given here, the banking system operates under a statutory reserve ratio of 10%. So if it is 10%, the minimum required reserve for a deposit of 8,000 is 8,000 into 10% is 800. But you can see that they are having a cash reserve of 3,000 with them. Means there is some excess reserves with them. Again, if excess reserves are there with the banking system, what does it mean? They have not completed the credit creation process, right? So they have given us the balance sheet of the banking system before completing the credit creation process, PBC. What they want us to do is to prepare the balance sheet of the banking system if they offer loans to the maximum extent. So the given balance sheet is deposits 8,000 and this is the banking system. Reserves 3,000 and loans 5,000. Right. So this is the given balance sheet. With that only we are supposed to calculate the balance sheet of the banking system with the full credit creation. So again this banking system is having a cash reserve of 3,000 means what? The banking system is having a cash reserve of 3,000 means what? The first bank should have collected a deposit of 3,000. If the statutory reserve ratio is 10%, the first bank should keep only 10% of 3,000 as reserves with them, means 300. Means the first bank can offer a loan of 2,700. The first bank can offer a loan of 2,700. If this process continued throughout the banking system will be able to create a total deposit. Under the 10% SRR, the deposit multiplier is 10. So 3,000 times 10, the total deposit is how much? 30,000. Right? 2700 times 10 is how much? 27,000. How much is the reserve figure they hold? The same 3,000 that they had at the beginning of the process. The same 30,000 they had at the beginning of the process. Sorry, same 3,000 what they had at the beginning of the process would be there at the end of the process as well. So this is how we can prepare the balance sheet of the banking system with the full credit creation. At the same time, we can do this calculation with the help of excess reserves as well. Right? So if the statutory reserve ratio is 10%, right? If the statutory reserve ratio is 10%, the first bank should only have 10% of, the banking system should only have 10% of it as the minimum reserve. 10% of 8,000 is 800. Means currently this banking system is having an excess reserve of 2,400. Currently this banking system is having an excess reserve of 2,400. So if you multiply this excess reserve of 2,500 by the deposit multiplier, it's not, it's 2,200. Right? If you multiply this excess reserve by the deposit multiplier, you will get 22,000 as the answer. That is the new loans the banking system can create and the new deposits the banking system can create. So if you added the new loans the banking system can create and the new deposits the banking system can create to the deposits and the loans, like this, they can create a new loan of 22,000. So we added to the existing loan of 5,000. So 5,000 plus 22,000 is 27,000. They can create a new deposit of 20,000. We added it to the existing deposit. So 8,000 plus 22 is 30,000. So either by using the excess reserves of the banking system or else by preparing the initial bank, you can get the balance sheet of the banking system. So therefore, the answer for part A, prepare the balance sheet of this banking system if they offer loans to the maximum possible extent. The deposits 30,000, reserves the same 3,000 and then the loans 27,000. So this is how you should arrive at the answer for part A. This is the balance sheet of the banking system with the full credit creation. Part B, show the new balance sheet of the banking system if this banking system receives a new deposit of 2,000 and offers loans to the maximum possible extent. That is, currently they are having a cash reserve of 3,000, no? Right? That is what we identified as the initial deposit. Now they are receiving another cash deposit of 2,000. Right? Another cash deposit of 2,000. So the best thing is to prepare the first balance sheet with the total cash deposit of 5,000. They already had cash reserves of 3,000 and now they are getting another cash deposit of 2,000, altogether 5,000. Right? So we can prepare the balance sheet of the first bank with a cash reserve of 5,000. And from that you can arrive at the balance sheet of the banking system. So they already had 3,000 and they are receiving new cash reserves of 2,000. Altogether, the initial deposit should be treated as 5,000. They already had 3,000 of cash, and then only the general public comes and deposits another 2,000 with them. So we should treat the first bank is having a deposit of 5,000 and the statutory reserve ratio is 10%, means the first bank has to keep a cash reserve of 500. The first bank can offer a loan of 4,500. With that we can prepare the balance sheet of the banking system. Deposits 5,000 times 10 is 50,000. Reserves, now they are having cash reserves of 5,000. Loans 4,500 times 10, 45,000. So when they are getting a new cash deposit, better you adjust it to the first balance sheet of the first bank, and then from that arrive at the balance sheet of the banking system with the deposit expansion multiplier. Right? So this is how we should arrive at the answer for part B. Right. So with this set of questions we discussed how to prepare the balance sheet and deal with a single bank, and then when it comes to the balance sheet of the banking system, how to apply the applications of the deposit expansion multiplier and then the credit creation process. From this point onwards, we are discussing some recent past paper questions which have tested from this section of commercial banking system. So we will discuss those few past paper questions. Right. Question number 11 from 2020 A levels. Assume that in a hypothetical economy during a given period of time, total money stock, money supply of the economy is 6,400 billion. Total amount of bank deposits held by the public was 5,200 billion. Statutory reserve ratio was 10% and the value of excess reserves held by the banks was 280 billion. Part A. What was the total amount of high-powered money in this economy? What was the total amount of high-powered money in this economy? So, high-powered money has three major components. What are the major components of high-powered money? Currency held by public, currency held by commercial banks, and then deposits held by commercial banks in the central bank. Currency held by public, currency held by commercial banks, and then deposits held by commercial banks in the central bank are the three components of high-powered money, are the three main components of high-powered money. In addition to these three, we can identify the deposits held by public in the deposits held by the government agency institutions in the central bank also as a component of the high-powered money. But usually we are identifying these three components to the high-powered money: currency held by public, currency held by commercial banks, and then deposits held by commercial banks in the central bank. From these three components, the last two, the currency held by public, and then the last two are currency held by commercial banks, and then the deposits held by commercial banks, in total can be identified as the cash reserves of commercial banks. The cash reserves of commercial banks. The total of these two is the cash reserve of the commercial banking system of the economy. So if you go back to the question, they say that the money stock, the money supply is 6,400 billion. Bank deposits is 5,200 billion. SRR is 10% while the banks are having an excess reserve of 280 billion. And what we are supposed to do in part A is to calculate the high powered money. Right. So, I identified the components of high powered money, currency held by public, currency held by commercial banks, and then the deposits held by commercial banks in the central bank. From them, the last two can be in general identified as the cash reserves of a commercial bank. So, therefore, we need to identify two things in order to calculate the high powered money now, because they have not given us the currency held by commercial banks and deposits held by commercial banks in the central bank separately. If you can calculate the currency held by public and then the cash reserves of commercial banks, right? If you can calculate the currency held by public and then the cash reserves of commercial banks, the total of these two figures show the high powered money. By adding the currency held by public and by adding the cash reserves of commercial banks, you can obtain the high powered money. Those two figures are needed for us. So, the money supply of this economy is given as 6,400 and then the bank deposits is given as 5,200. We are categorizing money supply into different categories: M1 narrow money supply, M2 broad money supply, M2B consolidated broad money supply, and then M4 monetary survey. And we include different components to the each money supply category. But from a broader point of view, the money supply has only two components. What are those? One is currency held by public and the other one is various types of deposits the public holds in the banking system of the economy. Various types of deposits the public holds in the banking system of the economy. So, therefore, they have given us the money supply as 6,400. They have given us the bank deposits. With the help of those two, we can calculate the currency held by public. Right? So, we can form an equation saying money supply equals to currency held by public plus various types of deposits held by public in the banking system. Money supply is 6,400, bank deposits is 5,200. Therefore, the remaining figure shows the currency held by public. So, currency held by public should be 1,200. So, 1,200 plus 5,200 gives you 6,400. Therefore, currency held by public is 1,200. We discussed that we need two things to calculate the high powered money here. What are those? One is currency held by public, other one is the cash reserves of commercial banks. So, we now calculated the currency held by public and it is 1,200. Now, in this question, you can see the question says that the deposits held by public in the banking system is 5,200, the statutory reserve ratio is 10% and a specific application is here. That is, the question says that they are having some excess reserves of 280 billion. Excess reserves of 280 billion. So, we can make use of what we discussed in the previous questions. First of all, we will calculate the statutory reserve. Statutory reserve is the total deposit into the statutory reserve ratio. The deposits held by public in the banking system is 5,200. Statutory reserve ratio is 10%. Therefore, statutory reserve of this banking system is 520. But what we want us to identify is the cash reserve, that is what is the component of high powered money. So, by adding up the statutory reserve and if there is any excess reserve, right, statutory reserve and excess reserve, both of them are there inside the cash reserve. We found out the statutory reserve 520. and in the question they have given us the excess reserves as 280. So therefore the cash reserves of this banking system is how much? 800. With this we can calculate the high powered money. High powered money is currency held by public and cash reserves of commercial banks. Currency held by public is 1200. Cash reserves of commercial banks we already calculated 800. Therefore high powered money is 2000. Therefore high powered money is 2000. So currency held by public 1200 and cash reserves of commercial banks is 800 we already calculated. So in part A, what was the total amount of high powered money in this economy? The total amount of high powered money in this economy is 2000. By this only we can do that calculation. And part B, what was the value of money multiplier? How do we calculate the money multiplier? Money multiplier is money supply. This is not the deposit multiplier. The deposit multiplier and money multiplier are two different concepts, right? So we should divide the money supply by the high powered money in order to calculate the money multiplier. In the question they have given us the money supply as 6400. High powered money as 2000. Therefore money multiplier of the economy is 3.2. Money multiplier of the economy is 3.2. Right. So we answered both part A and part B. We will move on to the question number 12. Suppose that a bank customer newly deposits rupees 10,000 in the current account and the required reserve ratio is 0.25. In other words, it is 25%. A. What are the required reserves for this new deposit? So they ask us to calculate the required reserve, or in other words, the statutory reserve for this new deposit of 10,000. Part B. What is the maximum amount of loan that the bank can grant on the basis of this new deposit? So one thing what you need to understand by reading the question is, they are not talking about the banking system here, they are talking about a single bank here. So therefore no credit creation process and there is no application of deposit multiplier in this question. So therefore we will see the statutory reserve ratio is given as 25%. Statutory reserve equals to the total deposit into the statutory reserve ratio. The deposit collected by the bank is 10,000. Statutory reserve ratio is 25%, right? Therefore, the statutory reserve of this bank is how much? 2,500. Statutory reserve of this bank is how much? 2,500. The part A, what they expect is what are the required reserves of this new for this new deposit. The required reserve or the statutory reserve, the same thing, only they ask us identify as required reserve or RR, right, is 2,500. the next part of the question, what is the maximum amount of loan that the bank can grant on the basis of the new deposit? We already discussed that whatever the excess reserve a commercial bank has at a given point of time only they can offer as loans. So we simply need to calculate the excess reserve, and that excess reserve only they can offer as new loans. So therefore excess reserve is cash reserve minus statutory reserve. Along with the deposit of 10,000, this bank collects a cash reserve of 10,000. The statutory reserve is 2,500. Therefore, the excess reserve created by this bank based on this deposit is 7,500. So, therefore, the maximum amount of loan the banking system can offer is 7,500 rupees. Right. So this is how we can answer the part B. The maximum loan this bank can offer is 7,500. Before that you have to calculate the excess reserve, and afterwards you should present that the maximum loan this bank can offer is 7,500. Right, we will move on to the question number 13. The following is a simplified balance sheet for one of the banks in a commercial banking system in a country. Following is a simplified balance sheet for one of the banks in a commercial banking system in a country. So again the question is related to a single bank. So when they are applying a single bank, again you must be aware that there is no credit creation process here, and there is no application of deposit expansion multiplier at all here. So we will move on to the questions. Part A, what is the required reserve ratio? Right, what is the required reserve ratio? So in this question the speciality is, right, there are different assets and liabilities, but the cash reserve is broken into two and given, like we did one question, like with the previous set of questions we did a question like this. The required reserves is separately given, the excess reserves is separately given. Required reserve is separately given, the excess reserve is separately given. So then the required reserve for a deposit of 100,000 is how much? 10,000. So with that we can calculate the required reserve ratio, or in other words the statutory reserve ratio. As they use the term required reserve ratio, we will use RRR, required reserve ratio. So required reserve divided by the deposit multiplied by 100. So the required reserve is 10,000 for a deposit of 100,000. Multiplied by 100, the statutory reserve ratio is 10%. Statutory reserve ratio is 10%, or the the required reserve ratio in other words. So part A we answered what is the required reserve ratio. Part B, assume that a customer withdraws rupees 2,000 million from his current account at this bank. By how much will this bank's reserve change based on this cash withdrawal? Assume that a customer withdraws rupees 2,000 million from his current account at this bank. By how much will this bank's reserve change based on this cash withdrawal? Right. So based on this cash withdrawal, by how much the bank's reserves are changing? We will see. So simply they are not asking us to calculate the new cash reserves of the bank. Simply they are asking by how much the cash reserves are decreasing. We already discussed with few calculations we did previously. If any withdrawal takes place from a bank, the dual impact of that transaction is, in one hand the deposit liability of the bank goes down, simply we should deduct it from deposits, and on the other hand the cash reserves of the bank goes down because there is a cash outflow from the bank as a result of a withdrawal. So therefore we simply need to say for part B, reserves decreased by reserves decreased by 2000 million. Reserves decreased by 2000 million. That is how we answer the part B. Part C, assume that the required reserve ratio remains unchanged. What is the maximum amount of new loans that this bank could make after the withdrawal of 2000 million? So after the withdrawal of 2000 million, deposits go down by 2000, cash reserves go down by 2000, and you have to calculate new statutory reserve, and afterwards you should calculate the new excess reserve. So whatever the excess reserve the bank has after this transaction would be the maximum new loan this bank can offer. So we will calculate the excess reserve therefore. So new deposit, they had a deposit of 100,000, from that only a withdrawal of 2000 took place. So therefore the new amount of deposits is 98,000. So in the balance sheet they have given us the reserves in two forms. One is required reserve 10,000, the other one is excess reserves 5,000. But what you need to understand is the required reserve is 10,000 only for the deposit of 100,000. Whenever the deposit changes, right, whenever the deposit increase or whenever the deposit decrease, that must lead for a change in the statutory reserve as well. So therefore this required reserve is matching only to this deposit of 100,000 rupees, right? Like even though they have given us the statutory reserve separately, the excess reserve separately, only thing what we need to know is there is a cash reserve of there is a cash reserve of 15,000 with this bank. There is a cash reserve of 15,000 with this bank before the withdrawal take place. So now the withdrawal of 2000 takes place now. Therefore new cash reserve is, they already had a cash reserve of 15,000, 10,000 plus 5,000. From that only a withdrawal of 2000 is taking place. Therefore new cash reserve of this bank is how much? 13,000. New cash reserve of this bank is how much? 13,000. And we will now calculate the new statutory reserve. How do you calculate it? The deposits went down to 98,000. From that the bank is supposed to keep a statutory reserve ratio of 10%. So 10% of 98,000 is 9,800, right? So now we will calculate the new excess reserve. How do we get the new excess reserve? By deducting the statutory reserve from the cash reserve. Cash reserve we already calculated 13,000. Statutory reserve we calculated 9,800. Therefore the excess reserve held by this bank is the 3,200. So therefore, the maximum new loan this bank can offer is rupees 3,200 million. This is how we arrive at this answer. So part C, assume that the required reserve ratio remains unchanged. What is the maximum amount of new loans that this bank could make after the withdrawal of 2,000 million deposits? So the maximum loan this bank can offer after the withdrawal of 2,000 million is how much? The 3,200 million rupees. So this is how we arrive at the answer for this question. Right, we'll move on to the next question. The balance sheet of a commercial bank is given below. Deposits 180,000, reserves 100,000, treasury bonds 40,000 and loans 40,000. Part A, if the statutory reserve ratio is 10%, what is the maximum amount of new loans that this bank could make in the future? Right, so we are supposed to calculate the maximum amount of new loans means what? Simply this is applied to, this is talking about a single bank, no? So no credit creation, no deposit expansion multiplier, it is simply talking about a single bank. So we simply need to calculate the excess reserve of this bank, and whatever the excess reserve this bank holds only can be offered as loans, right? So the deposit is 180,000, right? Based on that we will calculate the statutory reserve. $180,000 into 10% is 18,000. And then we need to calculate the excess reserve. How? By deducting the statutory reserve from the cash reserve. By deducting the statutory reserve from the cash reserve. So the cash reserve they hold is how much? 100,000. And the statutory reserve is how much? 18,000. Therefore, the excess reserve is 82,000. Excess reserve is 82,000. So this is the maximum new loan this bank can offer. Right, we'll move on to the part B. If rupees 10,000 million of deposits are withdrawn from this bank, if rupees 10,000 million of deposits are withdrawn from this bank, what is the maximum amount of new loans that this bank could make in the future? So again we need to calculate the new deposit, the new statutory reserve, the new excess reserve, and then the new excess reserve only they can offer as loans. So new deposit, the total deposit they had was 180,000. From that only 10,000 is withdrawn. Therefore, new deposit is 170,000. And then we need to calculate the new cash reserve. How? they already had cash reserves of 100,000. From that only the withdrawal of 10,000 takes place. As we already discussed, when a cash withdrawal takes place, that should be deducted from deposits as well as the cash reserves. So, therefore, new cash reserve of this bank will be 90,000. And now we should calculate the new statutory reserve. How? The new deposit is 170,000, and from that they need to maintain a statutory reserve of 10%. So, 10% of 170,000 is 17,000, right, and then you need to calculate the new statutory reserve, the new excess reserve by deducting statutory reserve from the cash reserve. The cash reserve they hold is 90,000, the statutory reserve they hold is 17,000, therefore there is an excess reserve of 73,000. So, the maximum new loans they can offer is 73,000. This is how we arrive at the maximum new loans the banking, this respective bank can offer after this withdrawal of 10,000. Right. Right. Question number 15. Assume that for a hypothetical economy, money supply is rupees 3,600 billion. Total bank deposits are 3,200 billion. The statutory reserve ratio is 10% and the banks do not hold excess reserves. Right? So, this is not talking about a single bank. Instead, this is talking about the whole economy. Right, this is not talking about a single bank, instead this is talking about the whole economy. What do they say? Assume that for a hypothetical economy, money supply is 3,600 billion. Total bank deposits are 3,200 billion. The statutory reserve ratio is 10% and the banks do not hold excess reserves. First question, what is the value of money multiplier for this economy? So, as we already discussed, the money multiplier should be calculated by using the formula money supply divided by the high powered money. Money supply divided by the high powered money is the formula for money multiplier. So, high powered money comprises of currency held by public, currency held by commercial banks, and then deposits held by commercial banks in the central bank. Right? Currency held by public, currency held by commercial banks, and then deposits held by commercial banks in the central bank. We already discussed that the total of these two can be identified as the bank reserves. The total of these two can be identified as the bank reserves. So, now if you go back to the question, what do they say? Money supply is 3,600 billion. And then the bank deposits is 3,200 billion, right? The statutory reserve ratio is 10% and the banks do not hold excess reserves. The banks do not hold excess reserves. So, therefore, first of all, we will try to get the currency held by public with this. We can say that money supply equals to currency held by public plus deposits held by public in the banking system. Money supply is 3600, bank deposits is 3200. What does it mean? The currency held by public should be representing the rest 400. Currency held by public should be 400. And then cash reserves of commercial banks should be calculated in the next step. Cash reserve. The question says that there are no excess reserves, therefore cash reserve and the statutory reserve are equal to each other of the banking system. Why? No excess reserves are maintained means what? Whatever the cash reserve they hold is the amount of whatever the cash reserve they hold is the statutory reserve they hold if they don't have excess reserves, right? So therefore the bank deposits is 3200. From this they are maintaining a cash reserve of 10%, means what? The cash reserves of commercial banks is just 320, right? So therefore currency held by public is 400 and cash reserves of commercial banks is 320. Therefore high powered money of the economy is 720. High powered money of the economy is 720. The money supply is already given 3600. High powered money we calculated 720. High powered money comprises of currency held by public, currency held by commercial banks, and then deposits held by commercial banks in the central bank. The currency held by currency held by commercial banks and then the deposits held by commercial banks in the central bank in total shows the cash reserves of commercial banks. The total figure of these two shows the cash reserves of commercial banks. The cash reserves of commercial banks, they don't maintain excess reserves, means the cash reserve of a commercial bank should be exactly equal to the statutory reserve, right? If there are no excess reserves with that respective commercial banking system, the cash reserve of that banking system is exactly equal to the statutory reserve. So therefore the total deposits 3200, that into 10% is 320. So therefore bank reserves is 320, right? So with that we calculated the high powered money. Currency held by public is 400 and then bank reserves in total is 320. So therefore money multiplier of this economy is 5. Money multiplier of this economy is 5. Next one. What should the central bank do to decrease the money supply by 100 million in this economy? What should the central bank do to decrease money supply by 100 million in this economy? The money multiplier shows the ratio between the money supply of the economy and the high powered money. Money multiplier shows the ratio between the money supply and the high powered money. In other words, the money multiplier shows the ratio between how many times of the high powered money of the economy is equal to the money supply. The money supply of a country is a certain number of times of the high powered money. So this ratio between the money supply and the high powered money only is identified as the money multiplier. So therefore, now they want to decrease the money supply by 100 million in this economy. Now we calculated the money multiplier as 5. Right, again money multiplier is money supply divided by high powered money. The same equation can be stated in this way, how high powered money into the money multiplier gives you the money supply of the economy. High powered money multiplied by money multiplier gives you the money supply of the economy. If so, that is, if high powered money multiplied by money multiplier gives you the money supply of the economy, any change occurs in the high powered money. Any change occurs in the high powered money multiplied by the money multiplier gives you the change that occurs in the money supply. Now the central bank wants to decrease the money supply by how much? The central bank wants to decrease the money supply by 100 million. Right? So this should be decreased by 100 million. Sorry. Money supply should be decreased by 100 million. And we know that the money multiplier is 5. So we should see by how much the high powered money should be changed. So divide both sides by 5. The high powered money should be decreased by 20. If high powered money is decreased by 20 only, based on this information, the money supply of this economy will go down by 20. Based on this information, the money supply of this economy will go down by 100 million. So in order to decrease the high powered money by 20 million, in order to decrease the high powered money by 20 million, this central bank of the economy can sell government securities worth of 20 million to the commercial banks. If central bank sold securities worth of 20 million to the commercial banks will have to pay cash and buy them from central bank. There will be a cash outflow from commercial banks to the central bank. The high powered money of the economy decreases by 20 million. So that will lead for the money supply of the economy to go down by 100 million. That will lead for the money supply of the economy to go down by 100 million. So this is how we can identify the answer for this question. So what should the central bank do to decrease money supply by 100 million in this economy? So the central bank should decrease the high powered money by 20 million in order to achieve this target. Think you understood the explanation. Next question. Assume that for a hypothetical economy, money supply is 1200 billion. The total bank deposits are 800 billion. The required reserve deposits ratio is 10%. That the bank do not hold excess reserves. So some same type question as of the 2016 question. The part A, what is the money multiplier for this economy? What is the money multiplier for this economy? So again, how do we calculate the money multiplier? Using the same formula, money supply divided by high powered money, right? So they've given us the money supply is how much? 1200 billion. Again, high powered money comprises of currency held by public, currency held by commercial banks, and then deposits held by commercial banks in the central bank. We learned that the total of currency held by public and the currency held by commercial banks is the bank reserves. Money supply is 1200, the bank deposits is 800. What does it mean? As we already showed the way of calculation, from the total money supply, when we deduct the bank deposits, we will get the currency held by public, 400. The bank deposits is 800. The statutory reserve ratio is 10%. Also the question says that the banks do not maintain excess reserves. Also the question says that the banks do not maintain the excess reserves. If the banks do not maintain the excess reserves, the statutory reserve is the cash reserve of the banking system. So that is 80. So 400 times 80 is 480. 400 times 80 is 480. So the banking system is therefore the high powered money of this economy is 480. So when you divide 1200 by 480, you will get the money multiplier as 2.5. You will get the money multiplier as 2.5. So that is how we answer the part A, the calculation of money multiplier. Part B, if the central bank purchases 3 billion worth of treasury bills from the commercial banks, what is the greatest amount by which the total money supply could change? If the central bank purchases 3 billion worth of treasury bills from the commercial banks, what is the greatest amount by which the total money supply could change? So we will go back to this. So based on the same equation, we can say money supply equals to high powered money into the money multiplier. On that basis, we can say any change in high powered money into the money multiplier gives you by how much the money supply of the economy changes. Now in this question says that central bank purchases 3 billion worth of treasury bills. So if central bank purchases 3 billion worth of treasury bills, what does it mean? If central bank purchases treasury bills worth of 3 billion, what does it mean? There is a flow of currency from the central bank to the commercial banks, means high powered money, currency held by commercial banks increase as a result of it. No? The currency held by commercial banks increase as a result of it. So currency held by commercial banks go up means what? The high powered money increases by 3 billion. And we calculated the money multiplier as 2.5. So on this basis we can say the money supply increases by 7.5 billion rupees. The money supply increases by 7.5 billion rupees. The question is, if the central bank purchases 3 billion worth of treasury bills from the commercial banks, what is the greatest amount by which the total money supply could change? So therefore money supply increases by 7.5 billion rupees. This is how we can arrive at the answer. Right. So, we did a discussion regarding the operations of the commercial banking system of an economy, right. We did few calculations and see how we did few calculations and learned how when the operations of a single bank is given, how it influences on the calculations and how can we identify the loans the banking system can offer and all. Afterwards, we did few calculations to see how the overall banking system's operations are influencing on the money supply, the total deposits, the total loans the banking system can create is affected when the whole banking system's operations are given. We learned that when the banking system is given only, when they are talking about the overall banking system only, the credit creation applies and then the deposit expansion multiplier is applied to that respective question. And apart from that, we learned the relationship between the money supply and the money multiplier, and we learned how a change in high powered money is influencing on any change in the money supply of the economy. In one hand, when the high powered money is changed, how the money supply is changed, and when we need to change the money supply by some amount, by how the high powered money should be changed in order to adjust the money supply of the economy. So, think you understood the discussion we made up to this point and think it is a useful discussion for you. So, with the previous discussion and with the today's discussion, we covered the money banking and price level lesson. So, with the previous day's discussion, we focused on money section, price level, the central bank, and today we focused on the commercial banking system's operation on the economy. I think you all understood the explanation we did and expect that this will be something which is helpful for your A-level examination. So, we will meet on another seminar focusing on the next lesson of the syllabus. So, thanking to the Bank of Ceylon for giving me this opportunity to contribute for this NanaJaya program. We will meet on another day with another section. Thank you very much.